A deal has been struck with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, well, sort of, and it has nothing to do with a pipeline in British Columbia. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is calling for patience as First Nations leaders are mulling it over. If it's not about the pipeline, is it more about reconciliation?
It's a little bit about reconciliation, a lot about rights entitled to the land. The Wet'suwet'en people like to say, look, we never ceded our territory to Canada. Some activists go as far to say it's not even Canada, and the government has no ability to impose law or speak to people. But, that's not the majority of people on the reserve. That's where the activists are. So this, set of discussions, it was Carolyn Bennett, the Indigenous Affairs Minister for the federal government, Scott Fraser from the British Columbia government. They were both there. And a very distinguished and experienced parliamentarian, former NDP MP, Nathan Cullen, was part of the discussions. He helped broker this, bring the sides together, bring together the hereditary chiefs with the representatives from the respective governments, and they tried to talk things through. And so our understanding of the deal, we haven't been able to see it. The people in the Wet'suwet'en band, they're able to see it and discuss it. Our understanding of the deal is that it's all around rights, title, and going forward. On the issue of the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which sparked all of this and led to these discussions, they just said, we agree to disagree. There's still some, disagreement. Of course, we know that the majority of the elected council and the majority of people on the reserve back the Coastal GasLink pipeline because it means millions of dollars a year for their community. But the hereditary chiefs that were part of this negotiation said, we didn't really come to an agreement on that. So a little bit disappointing on that side, but we'll see where things go.
And BC Premier John Horgan says the Coastal GasLink construction project will continue even if a tentative deal with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs is not reached.
That's what he's saying. I think that Premier Horgan is a bit more optimistic than I am at this point. Look, we've got a real problem in this country when it comes to building anything, and especially anything that touches on First Nations lands. Because while the elected council approved this deal, the majority of people in the community approved the deal. The hereditary chief said no. So are you negotiating with the right people? And if they say no and Premier Horgan says yes, are we going to see more attempts to shut it down? I was just at the biggest mining conference in the world here in Toronto, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a deal with two chiefs from two First Nations communities in far northern Ontario. I mean, talking so far north, there's no roads. And his deal is to bring a road to their area and a section of the north called the Ring of Fire, largest mineral deposit in the world, is what they believe is under there. And the chiefs are excited, and they say that this is going to bring prosperity to our people, connections to the outside world. Right now, they rely on ice roads and other means of travel. And there are people threatening to shut that down. We have a real problem in this country, and the Prime Minister didn't really solve it with this agreement. So that's why I'm not as confident as BC Premier John Horgan is.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Brian, is calling for the mining sector to move to a low carbon future. I think it's by the year 2050. What's that going to look like for our economy?
Well, it's part of the whole idea of Justin Trudeau that we're moving away from natural resource extraction. This is the same mining conference the Prime Minister was at that I was at for the Ontario Premier's announcement. And the mining sector has reduced its carbon footprint significantly, but not as far enough as far as Justin Trudeau is concerned. And we know that when it comes to oil and gas extraction, which this conference wasn't necessarily about, that he effectively wants us to phase out of that. In some ways, when you look at things like Bill C-69, which the pipeline industry called the No More Pipelines Bill, it also affects the mining industry. It affects the forestry industry, all of our natural resource extraction. And the Prime Minister was saying, we've got to move towards a low carbon, no carbon future. What's he going to do? Well, he's going to offer a tax break if you buy an off-road electric vehicle for the mining sector. So you've got a mining camp somewhere. Suddenly you've got to be buying electric vehicles. Look, a lot of our mining takes place in the northern part of the country. We've long since mined out the lower southern parts of the country. in the rich deposits are all up north where it's cold and where electric vehicles are going to be very difficult to keep going many parts of the year. So I think that the prime minister is trying to be a bit pie in the sky. He was asked by mining executives, what are your plans? Because they say, whatever your plans are, we've got to figure out how to work with them. You've promised net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Tell us what your plans are so we can start planning now. He's told them, you got to wait.
Our country saw a bit of a spike of the novel coronavirus this past week, pretty much all in Ontario, and the vast majority with a connection to coronavirus hotspots overseas, including Iran and Italy.
Iran, Italy, Egypt was one of the ones that has just popped up recently, and they're not calling it a hotspot yet, but Ontario's chief medical officer saying something's happening over in Egypt, so we don't really know. And one of the big problems that we've got, Hal, is that we're still experiencing coronavirus as something we import into this country. We do not have in community transmission. Now, I believe there's been a couple of cases where people have passed it on to their spouse or another close family member, but they're they're always connected to overseas travel to somewhere where the virus has been prevalent. Um, what we're trying to avoid is in community transmission. And that's what Iran has right now. And that's why Iran is so troublesome. So you would think that maybe the federal government would step up and say, okay, we're going to restrict travel to people who have been in Iran in the last 14 days, or we're going to screen them better. They're doing neither. What they're asking people to do is quite literally call me when you get in. They're telling people that travel into Canada from Iran or other hotspots, call us within 24 hours. Call your local public health agency and let them know that you're here and how you're feeling and start monitoring for symptoms. I know we can't go into full blown panic mode on this, and that's not what I'm advocating. But perhaps the people that ask, have you brought in any alcohol? Have you brought in any cigarettes? Do you have fruit? Maybe they could answer or add another couple of questions to ask people when they're coming in from specific countries. And we're not doing that right now. I think the country deserves better, and I think it's setting us up for a very bad experience going forward.
Scammers are trying to take our money using the coronavirus as an excuse. Brian, the warning comes from the World Health Organization. The fraudsters are posing as health officials. How low can they go?
Very low. And not just World Health Organization. I first started noticing this when I was writing stories on this. And of course, you've got to go to the Ontario Public Health or Public Health Canada and the World Health Organization, and you start seeing notices on their website. We will not call you. We will not email you. If you see a number from a call from this number, it is not us. So people are spoofing the Public Health Agency of Canada's 1-800 line. People are spoofing the World Health Organization's emails, meaning they're making it look like it's a health official calling you or emailing you, and they're reaching out because they're concerned about you, Hal, and they just need you to log in and give them this information and that information. And once they've got enough information to steal your identity or get into your bank account, they're going to end communication and rob you blind. And so that's where we're at right now. So we've got all the organizations saying, this is not something that we're doing. Please do not fall for this.
Wow, that's terrible. Now, Brian, still with the coronavirus, the disease has hit economies around the world, and that includes the loonie falling after the American Central Bank lowered its key lending rate by 0.5 point. It's the largest cut by the central bank since March of '09.
Yeah, since the middle of the big housing crisis in the United States, and of course we all know what happened to world economies then. So a 50 basis point drop, half a cent on in terms of lending, or half a point, sorry, in terms of lending. We can expect the Canadian Central Bank to follow that. Our dollar took a hit. We've seen world economies hit by this. Whether we're talking about in China, some of the stores that sell luxury goods have had to shut down. There's a big push on luxury goods in Japan, or sorry, in China. They're very focused on brands like Louis Vuitton and others. Those stores have had to shut down because people aren't going out. In places like Italy, they've seen a huge drop off in tourism in the northern part of the country. Milan hasn't even been hit, but the La Scala Opera House and the cathedral in the middle of town, they're seeing tourism dry up. Nobody wants to go there. I was talking to a colleague the other day saying, I've got a trip planned in about a month. Not sure what I'm going to do. Paid for his airline ticket already, but what do? Do you go into the hotspot? You start seeing people not going out, not shopping, not frequenting restaurants, not traveling, that starts to take a toll on economies. There's some speculation among analysts that we could see 0% growth for many companies in 2020.
Canada's telecom regulator, the CRTC, says it will not force mobile service providers to offer customers paper invoices, at least not yet. Two advocacy groups were wanting the CRTC to force TELUS-owned Kudo Mobile, who I used to be with, to reverse its move to electronic billing for all but a few select customers.
Yeah, so Kudu started this, and other providers have headed this way, including Rogers will go there at the end of the month. TELUS is already there. I'm not sure where Bell sits, but advocacy groups, including those for seniors, said, look, this is not fair. Kudu said, look, we're following the law because the Harper government did bring in a law saying you can't charge people extra for a paper bill. Do you remember when that was the big thing several years ago? And your bank was charging you $2 if you wanted a statement mailed to your house. The government said, you've been giving people this all these years. You can't turn around and say, we're going to charge you for it now when you're not charging it for an e-bill. Well, what we're talking about here is a mobile service, and that's part of why the CRTC decided the way they did. You can get the bill directly to your phone. And most of us have smartphones now. There's very few people that are using a flip phone anymore. So you can get the bill on your phone. You can pay the bill on your phone. This is hardly something that is going to put most people in jeopardy. And if you do get the bill electronically, you can still go into the bank and pay it if that's the way that you want to do it. So the CRTC is saying there's not a lot of hardship here. We're not going to force this. So expect this to be something in the wave of the future. Maybe we'll see it next with cable bills, which are also regulated by the CRTC. And of course, everyone else will eventually follow.
Brian, what's the latest with the two Michaels being held in captivity in China? Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. Have you heard anything?
They continue to be held. No change in terms of their situation. No change in terms of the position of the Chinese government. It's now at around, I'm forgetting the exact number, but it's around 450 days that they've been held at this point. We run a daily counter in the Toronto Sun saying, this is how long it's been. Please call the Chinese embassy. They're not listening. There was another foreign national, I believe out of Sweden, that was charged recently, and Canada stood up and said, we stand with them and call for them to be released. It's falling on deaf ears with the Chinese government, and I don't expect anything to happen soon until the issue with Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO, is resolved. In my view, these three cases are inextricably intertwined.
Absolutely. Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you.